I would really love to welcome to my podcast today, Annie Jeffery. Good afternoon, Annie.
Good afternoon, Jackie. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you here. And Annie, you are the Chair of Trustee and founder of hArt, which is an arts therapy charity based here in Hampshire. So can you tell us a little bit about hArt before we sort of delve into anything deeper? What is it and what is the aim of hArt?
hArt is a charity that I set up myself in 2014 in response to the understanding that there was a gap in provision for people to access creative therapeutic work to support mental health. And it came about really because I met an art therapist who was self-employed and finding it very difficult to find work in this part of the world. We're in the south coast area of the New Forest, and you can get quite a lot of access to these services in Bournemouth, Southampton and Winchester, but there is a huge area across the whole New Forest where that's very difficult. So it's been an aim really to try to provide across the forest the kind of services that are just not easily available. And it's always a challenge because of transport across the forest and how people can actually make contact with us.
Yes, yeah. I mean, and they do an amazing job. So in terms of, I mean, obviously you've worked a lot with charities in your life, but can you just give us a potted history, or how did you get here? How did Annie Jeffery start out, and where did all this kind of creativity in your life come from, do you think?
I'm not sure why I have got any creativity at all. I don't come from a particularly creative family, and I didn't get much encouragement from parents who really didn't understand what art was about. I loved my art lessons at school, but I was in a class where there was a star pupil who was a brilliant artist, and the rest of us didn't get much of a look in. So however good we were, I don't think we were ever going to be able to compete. And I was a bit frustrated by that. So I sort of went on from there and did a few classes with life drawing and portraits and things like that, but just evening classes. And it really wasn't till I went to France and I met somebody who was a sculptor giving classes. And I did a week working with him to do a portrait head, which we did in clay and then cast in plaster. And I got absolutely hooked on the whole thing and continued to do that because we lived in France for about 10 years. And I then ended up almost doing an apprenticeship with this chap who was half English, half Chinese, with a Northern Irish wife, living in the wilds of southwest France. It was the most bizarre coincidence of things. But anyway, I went from working in clay and plaster to starting to carve stone. And once I started carving stone, that was the thing that I just took to like a duck to water. It was so therapeutic, and that is the word, that there is something incredibly focusing and soothing about hitting a lump of stone with a mallet and a chisel when you're feeling a bit frustrated. It's a great way to get that out of your system, but also creating something that's soft and rounded. And I tend to go for sort of fairly abstract shapes and bodies and things, which are really amazingly tactile when you finish them, and you're creating it out of basically a hard lump of something that's existed already for 1,000 years or so. And I find that completely absorbing and fascinating. And that was my beginnings with any kind of therapeutic art, although I didn't identify it as therapeutic, perhaps to start with. But that was the opening up of something. And then I moved back to this country in 2000, met up with a couple of people who were already very creative artists in their own right. One of them taught me how to weld, which is a very girly thing to do. So I was able to create metal armatures and work with steel and all kinds of other medium. And I won a prize for one of my stone carvings, which kind of pushed me forward with my confidence. Did a couple of courses in more traditional types of stone carving, and had a rented studio for some considerable time. And then I got the opportunity to set up something with an old school friend, which was about, it was a community interest company to help to progress people's artistic aspirations towards being shown in galleries, but also to create education and community work. I found that slightly frustrating and stepped away from it quite quickly, but it whetted my appetite to show that people could benefit enormously from working creatively. So a couple of years later set up hArt, and that was because I had an accidental meeting with this art therapist who has continued to work with us to this day. And it's been a huge learning curve, and I can only say I'm really pleased that I found it, but I wish I'd found it 20, 30 years earlier, because I think it could have been something that really meant a huge amount to me for a lot longer.
Yeah. And so, I mean, obviously, you didn't study art in any kind of conventional?
No, I've got absolutely no formal art training whatsoever. In fact, the only thing I've got any formal training in at all is shorthand and typing, so that tells you how old I am. But it's something I've always enjoyed, was drawing. I used to be the child that drew all over their exercise books in class and got told off for it. But it's the 3D thing that really matters most to me. And although I do try to do a bit of painting, in particular portraits now, it's the 3D aspect of sculpture that fascinates me. And I've been lucky enough to get one or two things cast in bronze. And all of that, the whole process is just riveting, even though that's not something the artist actually engages with themselves, but working with a foundry and seeing what they do is fascinating as well. So many different aspects and so many different ways of being creative.
Yeah.
For me, it's stone carving that really gets me, but you know,
can you picture anything from your past that it had that sort of sculpture element to it? Or was it something that you literally came upon when you were in France?
I think it's something I literally came upon. I had played with clay. I went years ago, I'd gone to an evening class, and it was a pottery class. And when it came to me having my turn on the wheel, which we had to limit because there were quite a lot of us in this class and there weren't that many wheels, and I actually managed to spray the entire class with wet clay. And the teacher said, I don't think that's your thing. Try just doing some modelling with some clay. Yeah. So once I started playing with the clay, that fascinated me as well. And I wasn't interested in making pots. I thought those were, I hate to say it, but I think they're beautiful when they're done properly, but I was not good at it. So I was just modelling figures and faces and started to get that sort of 3D understanding of what it makes, you know, how you make something like that when you start off with a ball of something flat and then you turn it into something that's quite different. And that was the first thing. But then for years, I didn't do any of it. Don't know why, it was just not part of my life.
No. I mean, I've seen your amazing stone sculpture of the. She's not quite reclining, is she? And it is a rather large piece that is now.
Well, to start you fumbling around, she's actually called Organic Woman, and I have to be careful how I say that. And she is a piece of sculpture that was carved out of a 5-ton block of Portland stone. And I had the joy of going down to the quarry at Portland and picking out my raw lump of stone direct from the quarry, which was an amazing experience. And then she was craned up to the studio space I had at Sway. And then I spent nearly 2 years working on this because it had to be done mostly outdoors because the thing was so big, I couldn't actually get it into my studio space for a long time. And then once it was finished, and it is supposed to be a figure that's sort of organically coming up out of the ground. So it's very raw and unsculpted, if you like, at the base, but it becomes smoother and more obviously female form as you come up to the top lines. And it was just the most incredible experience to do. It was supposed to eventually go into a sculpture park, but the sculpture park never happened. So she's ended up in a hotel on the edge of a hotel garden and car park. But you know, she's still there, and I still go past her and think, I did that.
I mean, I think it's an amazing piece of work, and in fact, I think I'd met that sculpture before I'd actually met you. So yeah, it was quite amazing to realise it was you that had actually done it. So if anybody gets the chance to go to the Gordleton Mill in Sway, then go and have a look because she's still there and she is quite amazing, So what do you think? What is your kind of definition then of creativity? How would you define it?
I think it's anything where you use your brain to make something happen. And I mean, honestly, that can be from reading a book to making a cake to sewing a button on. I mean, it's making change. And if that is something that then didn't exist before and you've created it, it doesn't matter what that is. It's still creative, and it's connecting your right and left side of your brain. I know that there's neuroscience around it, but it's just an absolute thrill to take, for me, a lump of stone that could be just a rough piece of stone, or it could be a carved block or whatever, and then turn it into something that simply never existed before. And very often, and I'm speaking from my perspective, you will start with an idea in your mind of what you want to do, and if you're really organised, you'll make a clay model of what you want to do and then try and replicate that in the stone. And it rarely turns out like that because stone like wood or anything else, has its own little little imperfections and things. And if you hit one, you can break a bit of stone off. And there's that, the joke about, the hand coming off and all that kind of thing. Well, it doesn't matter. It's what you create that didn't exist before. So that's the magic of it for me. And it's something that is unique to everybody. And it can be it can be anything for anyone. It can be picking up a matchbox and carving matchsticks into little models. It doesn't matter. It's just that absorption of your mind into something new. I think that's really one of the best ways I can describe it.
Yeah. No, that's certainly something that's come up before in some discussions of trying to define what creativity is. I mean, somebody has said it as simply as it's just doing. So that as long as you're doing something, then you are creating something. Also, are our thoughts creative? So is every thought we have a creation because it's a new thing to us, or it could go quite deep, couldn't it?
I think it's also to do with it's also very often to do with problem solving. How do I get from A to B? And you do have to be creative to do that. So one of my biggest concerns is the amount of lack of creative work that's now going into schools, and the fact that the arts are being reduced and the education around arts is being reduced in schools, so that children are not getting the understanding that if you don't have an immediate answer to something, you use your brain to figure out how you get from this situation here where I have no solution to, I found a solution. Yeah. And they want to be given every single step along the way. And I think that's really sad, because they're losing out so much on the very essence of what makes us human, that we can problem solve. And it's really wrong that people see the arts as being separate from that, because actually I think they're completely integrated and they should be encouraged hugely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there is that real connection between the problem solving and the creative mind. That whether it's creating a maths problem or creating a something to do with biology or an experiment. It's all creative, and we kind of have this. We seem to be tied up with this thought that in order to be creative, you need to be able to draw. So people say, well, I'm not creative because I can't draw. It's like, if you were an artist, maybe you could draw, but obviously, being creative is something completely different. And maybe schools don't. Do you think maybe schools don't understand that?
I think there's too much emphasis on just picking up a pencil and drawing a drawing and having a recognisable outcome from that. And I think people are beginning to understand that creativity has all sorts of different forms. And the wonderful Grayson Perry with his art club during lockdown has been a joy. And I'm delighted he's going to come back again, and he's been recommissioned for next spring, because it did start people thinking, actually, I can do that. It doesn't have to be great art. It doesn't have to be something that people judge and give me marks out of 10 on. It's what it does for me that matters more than anything. And that's, I think, non-judgmental is one of the words that we use about everything that we do with hArt, because it's not about teaching somebody to be an artist. It's about giving them an understanding of a number of tools and possibilities, how they can then use it for self-expression. And that creative little seed is there in all of us. It just somehow or other doesn't get watered for a lot of people. But if you water it in the right way, my goodness, it can be spectacular.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that case, I would assume you would assume everybody is born creative, that we all are.
I think so. And I think for some people that creativity is more around the problem solving, which would mean that, you're perhaps more likely to be a really amazing mathematician. But then if you look at how many people who are great musicians are also very good mathematicians. So that is the creative thing is still going on in that particular way. So I do think people are born creative. I think it's just how they have it. If they have a family that nurtures it and suggests, we'll work on this, we'll read stories, we'll make up stories, or that you get the right teachers in schools in early stages. I have a friend whose thesis I typed out for her, who was doing a mature student degree in art, and she wrote that her daughter had in primary school had done a painting, and she put the sky in as a sort of greeny turquoisey blue colour with pink streaks going through it, which could have been an evening sky or a morning sky. And the teacher said, skies are never that colour, they're just blue or grey. And she said, but I wanted to get the colours that you get in the roasting tin when you put water in it, when you try to wash it up after Sunday lunch. And I thought, now that is a creative child, but she had that knocked straight out of her and was told, no, you can't do that, by a teacher who probably was hard pressed or whatever. She may have many, many reasons for not actually, following up on that. But that child may have then lost that because they didn't think it was the right thing to do. And that it's taking them rights and wrongs out of things when you're being creative, I think.
No, that non-judgmental, I think is it really is so important, just not to judge people on what they can and can't do, but just let them express themselves. And it's, in terms of your own well-being and how you've used art for your own sort of therapy, you said obviously the sculpture is very good at battering hammers and stuff, which I totally get. But did your love of doing that come from a therapeutic need for yourself?
I don't know that I identified it as such, but I certainly know that I came to that in my 40s when I was living in France. I started sculpting when I was 40 and I was feeling quite lonely. We were in a very isolated place. I needed something to occupy me and to give me a different outlook. And it was just happened that I was lucky enough to stumble upon this, and then it became an absolute passion. And then sort of 10 years later, it saw me through quite a difficult divorce and a period of depression when I was actually on medication and feeling very low indeed. And I think, I'm not going to say it saved my life, but it certainly saved me from getting into a much deeper depression. And when I came out of the depression, I found that that was something that I could look back on and think, wow, that was amazing. And it did give me a fantastic amount to focus on. And that's when I really understood how much creativity can do for people. And I suppose it's no surprise that I was nearly 60 when I set hArt up, because that was when it really all dawned on me, and talk about being a late starter, that this was something that's very powerful and could be benefiting lots of people for most of their lives. And I mean, the earlier you start, the better. If those are things that you can do for your own self-care, and that is an expression that we've come to hear a lot of recently, but it is about finding ways to manage your own emotions. And even if you can't express them and you're not quite sure where they've come from, if you get them out and you actually translate them into something tangible, that's an incredible thing to be able to do. It's a gift and a great pleasure.
Yeah. And I wonder then why people find that difficult to do sometimes, maybe to find a medium. Maybe it's a finding something that works for them, and perhaps people just don't have that time.
I think one or two people said to me, oh, you're so lucky to have found that when I started sculpting, and they could see what it did for me. And I said, well, I just didn't stop looking, because I've tried all sorts of things. I've written quite a lot in my life, but that never quite did this for me. And, I've been fairly musical at times, and I've done a number of attempts at doing different things to try and engage me in the same way. But the only thing that's done it consistently is sculpture. Yeah. And I think you just have to keep unlocking doors and hoping that one of those doors will open into this world that you've been trying to find for yourself. And like I said, it could be somebody baking and decorating cakes. It could be somebody who goes into book binding. I mean, I can't knit to save my life, but at one time I used to make bobbin lace, which is the most fiddly thing in the world. And I can't actually see to do it anymore. But at the time I did enjoy it, and it was very absorbing.
Yeah.
So I think people have got to try things and not be frightened of trying things. And again, that can go back, when you're talking about art as therapy. If somebody has knocked you back at some time and said, oh, don't do that, you're rubbish at it, then of course it takes a lot of courage to actually say, no, I'm going to try this again. And you just need to be in the right frame of mind. You just need to be in the right place. Perhaps somebody says to you, look, I've got this here, have a go at this. And it's giving people a chance to just have a go, because you never know what's going to come out of it.
Yeah. I mean, and certainly in terms of lockdown, I found myself, I'm from a creative background, as you know. I enjoy sort of my own creativity, but actually it's been difficult. And I would imagine lots of people have found that they get so wrapped up in the sort of working and running a family and a household and all that sort of stuff, that they don't give themselves time or permission to actually do something, or give themselves the time to find something that they would enjoy in that way and that would help them in that way. But certainly in lockdown, I think it's certainly for me, it's been a very creative time. So is there anything within lockdown that you found in yourself that you've done more of, or have you sort of?
Well, I've worked more actually. I've had so little time. I had this fantasy that I was going to have, at least 3 days of the week, a long weekend basically, to be out in my studio and actually do some work. I haven't really managed it. And the problem with sculpture is that you do find it very hard unless you have consistent days at a time to go and work. You can't really just pick it up and do a couple of hours here and a couple of hours there, because you need that continuity of creative flow, especially if you're stone carving. I have done things with plaster bandage, which is one of the most wonderfully fun and messy things to play with and make small sculptures quite quickly with, but not enough time to actually be creative. So my creativity, if you like, has gone into how do we manage this situation and trying to keep hArt ticking over in some form, although the output that we've had has been quite limited. Unfortunately, we don't have the technical skills in a very tiny team to do as much online as I would have liked to have done. And when there were those opportunities, it was brilliant. And we connected with Spud, who's another local charity that we've worked with, and an FDC came up with some funding, and we did the Nest project, which is accessible still on our website. And that's about 14 films now of people, artists, yourself, and art therapists, all providing options for people to engage with, and very often using just found objects and so on to have creative ideas and to develop those ideas. So that was incredibly satisfying, and that's certainly something we're looking at doing more of for hArt going forward, is how we actually engage with the online audience. One of the disadvantages we've had in a way has been that we have a limited audience, because our art therapy groups are normally limited to a maximum of 8 people, and therefore we haven't had a vast audience to go straight on to online working with. And that's something we need to grow, but we're looking at ways of doing that as well. So my brain has been very well exercised, and I've had to come to creative ways of managing all of that, but I haven't actually had the creative output I would have liked to have done. I have baked a few cakes, because that's fairly instantaneous and enjoyable, but it hasn't been the creative time that I thought it might be at the outset. So,
I think a lot of people's time has been taken up, if they haven't, if they're having to work, obviously, but a lot of people have been trying to diversify. Certainly people that I know that are running their own businesses are suddenly, like myself, work, and like with hArt as well, it all kind of came to a crashing halt back in March. And I think people have spent that time thinking, how am I going to diversify? What do I do? How do I transfer what I do in a room full of people to a screen? So I think lots of people are having to do that.
I think one of the pluses of how it's been has been that I have had the opportunity to go online and use time to connect on Zoom calls and networking with people right across the country, because what this has done is to allow that with the technology that exists now, so that whereas before you'd have a meeting with maybe 3 or 4 people because they were in the local area and they could get together on a certain day at a certain time, you can now do a Zoom call with people in Durham and Cornwall and so on, and get 20 people together, all with a similar background, and offering each other an enormous amount of advice and peer support. And they're in what I'm talking about at the moment is charity peer support, because with smaller charities, you very often have just one person who is carrying a lot of the load, and it's quite difficult to actually spread that and talk to other people and say, oh, it's not just me then. And there's a lot of support you get in that. So that's one of the big pluses. And I wish I'd bought shares in Zoom.
Yes, don't we all? I found that as well. I mean, just the networking thing online has been a lifesaver, really. Just in terms of being able to connect with other people and actually making more meaningful connections somehow.
Yes.
If you end up with in a breakout room with 2 people that you've never met before, it's amazingly how quickly you can get to know each other. It's on a different level than sitting in a venue somewhere.
Yeah, no, I think that's been one of the pluses, and the downside of that is you tend to be sitting in front of a screen an awful lot, which is not very good for middle-aged spread and everything else.
No, I know the feeling.
Yeah.
Just in terms of charities, just talking on the subject of charities, obviously throughout your life you seem to have been connected with one charity or another. Can I just ask how that came about? What kind of started that for you, and what were the first charities that you were involved with?
The first thing I was involved with was Riding for the Disabled, and I was involved there with the Fortune Centre, which was still quite a young organisation, but it's grown enormously over its 30 plus years that it's been in existence now. And Riding for the Disabled was, of course, a national charity, and the Fortune Centre had its own group, and I was volunteering there on a regular basis. And then they asked me to become chairman of that group, the RDA group. From there, they invited me to become a trustee of the Fortune Centre itself, and through that, I then became trustee of a spina bifida group, which was based in Bournemouth. And then I suppose it just sort of went on from there, although I then interrupted the flow somewhat by moving away to live in France for 10 years, because they don't do charity in the same way as they do in this country. But while I was over there, I read about another charity that had been set up in Exbury in 1996. It was in a Mail on Sunday colour supplement. I mean, you know, before the internet was our main source of information. And that was the Honey Pot charity. And when I came back to live in this country 4 years later, because it was so local to the forest area in which I live, I got in touch with them and I became an ambassador for them. And it was just something that grew from there, really. And I just feel very drawn to supporting organisations who are giving people chances in life that they just wouldn't otherwise get. And it's nothing to do with making me feel better about myself. It's genuinely to do with trying to give people opportunities that don't exist otherwise. And it's just something I feel very strongly and passionately about. So it just happens that these have all been New Forest based, and I am New Forest born and bred, so I suppose it's not unnatural. But the local communities here, I feel, do have problems in terms of accessing bigger opportunities and services, and transport is such a big issue around here. So it's trying to get things to people as much as expecting them to travel to us to access all these things.
Yes, I mean, we've certainly worked together on trying to get buses out to people and having arts activities on buses. So that's been a big one, certainly for the New Forest and for myself. And we've both been involved in Folio, which is obviously a New Forest collection of organisations, arts organisations in our area. So I mean, that's something you've been involved in right from the beginning.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about Folio and what the involvement is there.
Well, Folio is a sort of umbrella organisation which covers about 9, I think, separate organisations who are all involved in the arts, heritage and culture in the New Forest area. And it ranges from Forest Forge Theatre, Forest Arts, there's Coda, which is a music trust, of which I'm also incidentally a trustee. There is the St Barb Museum and Spud. I'm going to miss some out, so I'm going to be very unpopular, but it's basically organisations that came together originally under a New Forest District Council initiative to try to create a bit of a hub, if you like, for the arts, which were not particularly well represented across the New Forest, where I have to say I think probably tourism has been the driving force for where funding has gone and that kind of thing. But obviously creativity and the arts are important. And so we came together a couple of years ago and branded ourselves as Folio New Forest in order to sort of launch ourselves at the New Forest Show as an organisation that gave people an opportunity to connect with us individually, but under that banner. And we've done some successful fundraising with Arts Council England funding to do a virtual reality presentation, which we did last summer. And it's just a kind of partnership organisation where we can work with others under that banner and perhaps get funding together. But it also is about peer support and helping each other, and sometimes, you know, saying, well, if a bit of funding's not necessarily right for us, you could have a look at it for you, and that kind of thing. And it's about cooperation and supporting each other as well.
Yeah, definitely that sort of collaboration between arts organisations, between artists, between creative people, or you know, anybody. Once you get a few people together, and the ideas keep coming, as I know. That's why I used to love those Folio meetings. We would sit down and do like a bit of a brainstorm, and all these ideas would come up. And then you had to find the funding for them, which
yes,
always slightly more difficult. So in terms of going forward, and I know there were obviously issues with the lockdown and hArt in particular as a charity, but How do you see, what are the positives for the future, do you think, for hArt and maybe some of the other charities, specifically in the New Forest, but just in general?
I think people are talking to each other an awful lot more, and they're seeing where opportunities are for working together and understanding that there is going to be an enormous amount of value to us to go for joint funding applications, joint projects, and to give as much breadth as we possibly can to our audiences. And that engagement with the community is going to become key. So it may not be, for example, we do art as art therapy and go into schools and do one-to-one working, whereas I think now there is also going to be more around broader community-based work. And we don't stop doing the art therapy if it's required, it's still very much there, but perhaps we're working with other organisations to make bigger opportunities for people to engage in larger numbers, and trying to get to some of the harder to reach areas. You know, it's really quite difficult sometimes for communities to go even from one side of the forest to another. So we need to go to them, and we need to find out safe ways of doing it, particularly in these days. And online can furnish some of that, but it's not going to be the answer to everything. So outdoor working is certainly something that we're very, very keen to pursue. We've done several projects outdoors at different venues across the area. And we will certainly be looking at working again with students from various schools and colleges to bring them together, but also providing bigger events and engaging with other people on different levels to, you know, show them who we are, what we do, and hopefully at some point there will be an opportunity to have a proper festival every year, which we did in a small way a couple of years ago, and that's how Folio sort of was born. But I do think there is an appetite now for people to explore all these possibilities. So taking that forward, yeah, that's the way to go, I think, is more partnership working, doing it in a more cohesive way, understanding what our strengths are as individual organisations and bringing those on board for other organisations, and spreading the load a bit more.
Yeah.
And also sharing our skills. You know, that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of obviously lockdown and the way things are changing, and they're changing daily, as we know.
Yeah.
But obviously the outdoor work is something that it can be done. You know, it's certainly in terms of me getting back into a venue and doing the work that I do, that's sporadic. I managed to get into a room vaguely over August, but obviously that will now kind of stop. But in terms of outdoor work, that's something that you can continue. Can you just explain a little bit about what it is? What is the outdoor work?
It's been bringing together groups of people. I mean, we've had students from a couple of sixth form colleges. We've had groups of adults with sort of mild to medium mental health issues. We work in a venue that's carefully chosen so that it's all risk assessed and carefully boundaried so that people are not just going to wander off and disappear. And they are usually working in a group of a maximum of 8, as I think I've said before, where there are volunteers there to support those people. Sometimes they come with their own carers or teaching staff, teaching assistants and so on. And depending on the need, they will then work with a therapist and a number of volunteers to do work with found objects, natural environment. There's a bit of meditation very often to start each group off so that people are really in the space and in the moment. There's usually a campfire with the opportunity to make hot drinks and toast marshmallows and that kind of thing. It's a lovely group situation, and they will make things like perhaps a bee box or bee house, or an insect box, or wind chimes and things like that are using natural materials, quite simply put together, but it also requires a certain amount of interaction and communication. And we've worked also with wonderful creative woodsmen who are absolutely skilled in looking at the environment and teaching people about what insects are doing this and what birds you're hearing and all that kind of thing. So it's a very calming and enjoyable situation. With the students who are younger, we require them to turn their phones off, and every member of staff that comes with them says, I don't know how you've done that, because that's the thing we can't get them to do. And if you actually switch the phones off and allow them to connect, the children to connect, or the students to connect with each other in a meaningful way and not just through a screen, there is the most incredible response to that. And it really does indicate just how reliant we've become on devices, when actually we've got so much that is therapeutic and right on our doorsteps, and we just need to open our eyes and connect with it again.
Yeah,
It's about educating them as well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's certainly in terms of being in the forest, it's just such a perfect place to be. And obviously you grew up in the forest, so you've kind of always lived here. So can you?
Yes, well, apart from an aberration of 10 years when I went to France, but yeah, it was the place I needed to come back to, and it does feel very much like home. And it's changed since I was a child, and there are areas of the forest that you can't just go charging across in a car or on a bike and things, and that's quite right, because you've got to protect the environment, and it's a really vital environment to keep and save. And that's why we're really pleased to work with people like the National Park Authority here, and looking at, where we can develop sites that are private enough for people to feel confident and safe in to do our work, but at the same time not making any kind of impact or negative impact on the environment. So yeah, the New Forest is really very important to me, and I don't see myself ever leaving here again. It's just, where I feel most comfortable and most at home.
Yes, absolutely. In terms of looking at what else is going on for hArt, where can people find out what you're up to, what hArt are doing, and any of the others? I know obviously Coda is very close to your hArt now, being a trustee. Can you let us know where we can find out more about what's going on?
Yes, if you have a look at our website, we're www.hart.works, and you can sign up on that for a newsletter in the contact page, and that is a newsletter that we send out electronically whenever we've got news to send out, which is not always every month, but we try to keep in touch with people like that. We've also got a Facebook page which you can obviously look for and like. It's hArt Lymington, and if you want to get involved with us in some way, want to volunteer with us, we obviously don't have a huge amount that you can be actually participating with at the moment, sadly, but we're always looking for people with interest in what we do, and possibly fundraising ideas. If you want to go and I was going to say climb Everest, but I don't think that's a good thing to do, ecologically speaking, these days. But if you want to do something to raise funds for us, we'd be thrilled to talk to you. We are always interested in hearing from people who have stories to share, who understand what the creative impact has been for them and how it's helped them, and testimonials are always incredibly important for us as well. So people's stories are really great. What we want to do when we create we hope to do a YouTube channel to put this new online input onto, is to create an online gallery so that people can submit their work to that. They can do that with Nest as well at the moment through the Spudworks website. But we want to hear from you. We want this to be something that you're engaging with, and if people would like to have their thoughts and ideas considered for how we go forward, then that's great as well. So
through the Facebook page and through the website.
Through the website, yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's fantastic. And I know personally from working on Nest and putting my little film together for that with the creative writing prompt, that's really worthwhile, because I looked at some of the other videos on there, and that's a great resource for people just to go into. Excellent. Oh, well, thank you so much, Annie, for your time today. It's been a pleasure, as usual.
My pleasure too. It's always good to talk.
Yeah, it's always good to talk. And so thank you very much, Annie Jeffery, and we will hopefully catch up again soon.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Very much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.